Jake Thornton's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the rifle. The jet-black stallion lay bleeding in the snow at his feet, eyes rolling white with terror. And Jake knew, absolutely knew, if he opened that gate, he'd be stepping back into a world that had already destroyed him once. 3 years. 3 years of silence, of hiding, of convincing himself that caring about anything was the mistake that got men killed. But the horse was dying. Midnight, that's what he'd call him later, was dying right there in front of him. And somewhere in the blizzard, men with guns were coming to finish what they'd started. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end of this story. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let me tell you what really happened that winter. The shot came first. Not the storm, not the horses, not the decision that would change everything. The shot. A single crack that split the winter air like ice breaking under weight, and Jake Thornton was running before he knew why. His boots hit snow that had been falling for 18 hours straight. The cabin door slammed behind him, and the cold took his breath the way it always did up here. Sudden, complete, unforgiving. He'd learned to breathe through it. 3 years on this mountain had taught him that much. The corral gate was open. Jake stopped dead. He never left the gate open. Never. In 3 years of living alone at 9,000 feet, he'd forgotten appointments, lost track of days, let the coffee boil over until it burned black on the stove. But he had never, not once, left that gate open. 2 shapes moved in the whiteout. Dark, stumbling. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. The first horse went down hard. Its legs just folded, like someone had cut the strings holding a puppet upright. The second one, smaller, a mare, stood over it, head low, sides heaving. Even from 20 feet away, Jake could see the steam rising off her in clouds. He should have closed the gate. Should have turned around, gone back inside. Let the mountain take whatever the mountain wanted. That's what 3 years of isolation had taught him. The safest thing a man could do was nothing at all. Instead, Jake walked forward. The snow was already covering the blood, but he could see it. Dark streaks across the stallion's shoulder, its flank. Not clean wounds. Not the kind that came from barbed wire or a fall. These were deliberate. Intentional. Someone had done this. The mare saw him coming and shifted, putting herself between Jake and the fallen stallion. She was protecting him. That stopped Jake cold, harder than the temperature ever could. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded strange, rusty. He hadn't spoken to another living thing in 4 months. "Easy now." The stallion's eye rolled toward him, dark, wet, terrified. Its breath came in short bursts, each one visible in the frozen air. Jake had seen that look before, on men, on animals. It was the look that came right before the decision. Fight or die trying. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said, knowing the horse couldn't understand words, but hoping it might understand tone. "I'm going to help, if you'll let me." He moved closer. The mare stomped once, a warning, not an attack. Jake kept coming anyway. When he reached the stallion, he knelt in the snow beside it. And that's when he saw the brand. Not a brand. Worse. Someone had carved into this horse's hide with a knife. Deliberately. Methodically. Letters that spelled out a word Jake recognized even before his brain caught up with what his eyes were seeing. Kane. "Son of a bitch," Jake breathed. Victor Kane. The name hit him like a fist. 3 years, and he'd managed not to think that name more than a dozen times. 3 years since Kane's son died on Jake's watch. Since the whole town turned against him. Since Jake climbed this mountain and decided staying alive wasn't the same as living. And now, Cain had sent him a message. In blood. On horseback. The stallion tried to rise and failed. Its legs scrambled against snow and stone, hooves throwing ice, but the strength wasn't there. The mare made a sound Jake had never heard a horse make before. High, desperate, almost human. "I know," Jake said quietly. "I know you're scared." He was scared too. Terrified, actually. Because helping meant caring, and caring meant being vulnerable. And being vulnerable was how good men ended up dead or broken. Jake had chosen broken. It was safer. But the horse was dying. Jake stood, walked back to the cabin, and grabbed what he needed. Blankets, rope, the medical kit he'd kept from his guiding days. Whiskey for sterilizing wounds. When he came back out, the mare hadn't moved, still standing guard. Still protecting the one who couldn't protect himself. "You're loyal," Jake said. "Loyal will get you killed up here." He pressed the blanket against the worst of the wounds, the carved brand across the stallion's shoulder. The horse flinched, but didn't fight. Didn't have the strength left to fight. "That's it," Jake murmured. "That's it. I've got you now." The bleeding slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. Jake worked fast, wrapping, tying, checking. His fingers went numb, then started burning as circulation fought its way back. He'd forgotten how much doctoring hurt the doctor. "You're going to make it," he told the stallion. Not a promise, a command. "You hear me? You're going to make it because I didn't climb down off this mountain just to watch you quit." Except Jake hadn't climbed down. The mountain had come to him, in the form of 2 half-dead Mustangs and a name carved in flesh. He got them both inside the lean-to, attached to the cabin. More dragging than leading, the stallion's weight nearly pulling Jake down twice. The mare followed without being asked, staying close to her companion, and Jake thought about loyalty again, about the cost of it. Inside, he packed hay into the trough, hay meant for his mule, hay he'd need to replace before the winter was through. The horses ate slowly at first, then desperately, like they hadn't seen food in days. They probably hadn't. Jake sat back against the wall, rifle across his knees, and stared at the stallion, at the carved letters, at the violence written into living flesh. "Who did this to you?" he asked. But he already knew. Cain. Cain, who owned half the territory. Cain, who'd blamed Jake for his son's death, rather than admit the boy had been drunk and reckless and stupid. Cain, who'd turned the town against Jake with lies and money, and the kind of power that didn't need truth to survive. Cain, who apparently spent his free time torturing wild horses. The wind picked up outside, rattling the lean-to's walls. The blizzard was settling in for real now. By morning, the pass would be closed. No one in, no one out. Just Jake, 2 wounded horses, and whatever the hell came next. He should have been afraid. Should have been planning his escape, his defense, his survival. Instead, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Anger. Clean, pure, righteous anger. "They hurt you," he said to the stallion. "They hurt you and they sent you up here to die, and they probably figured I'd do the same. Turn you out. Let the mountain finish what they started." The horse watched him with dark, knowing eyes. "Yeah, well," Jake said, and something like a smile pulled at his mouth, the first in longer than he could remember. "I'm real tired of doing what people figure I'll do." He stood, checked the wounds again, added more hay to the trough. The mare had stopped watching him like a threat. She was watching him like... what? Hope? Trust? Jake didn't trust trust. Trust got people killed. But he stayed anyway, sat back down, kept watch. Because somewhere out there in the blizzard, whoever had carved that name into the stallion's hide was probably waiting for news. Waiting to hear that the horses had died, that Jake had turned them away, that the message had been delivered and received. They were going to be disappointed. "My name's Jake," he said to the horses, feeling ridiculous and not caring. "Jake Thornton. Used to be a wilderness guide. Used to be a lot of things. Now I'm just the hermit on the mountain, the broken scout, the man who let Cain's son die." The stallion's breathing had steadied. The wounds had stopped bleeding. Small victories. "But you know what?" Jake continued. "I didn't let him die. He died because he was drunk, and he ignored every warning I gave him, and he fell because gravity doesn't care about your daddy's money. I tried to save him. I tried so goddamn hard." Saying it out loud hurt, like lancing a 3-year-old infection. Painful, but necessary. And Cain blamed me anyway. Of course he did. Easier than admitting his golden boy was just a spoiled kid who thought rules didn't apply to him. The mare had lain down now, close to the stallion, their sides touching, keeping each other warm, keeping each other alive. Jake thought about the cabin behind him, about the 3 years he'd spent in it, alone, convinced that was safer. Convinced that was what he deserved. "I don't know why you came here," he said quietly. "I don't know if someone drove you here, or if you just ran until you couldn't run anymore. But you picked my gate, my mountain. And that means something." What it meant, Jake didn't know yet. But sitting there in the dark, listening to the blizzard rage outside, watching 2 wounded horses breathe in rhythm with each other, he felt the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Not breaking, just cracking. Just enough to let something in. Or maybe, Jake thought, just enough to let something out. The night settled deep and cold. Jake didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the stall wall, rifle in his lap, and kept watch the way he used to keep watch for clients who trusted him to bring them home safe. Most of them he had. Most of them. At some point near dawn, the stallion lifted its head and looked directly at Jake. Not with fear, not with pain, with something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "Yeah," Jake said. "I see you too." And he did. He saw himself in those dark eyes. Wounded, scared, angry, but still breathing, still here, still fighting, even when fighting felt impossible. The storm continued to build. Snow piled against the cabin walls. The wind screamed, and Jake Thornton, the hermit of Thornton Peak, the broken scout, the man the town had forgotten, made a decision. He was going to save these horses, and then he was going to find out exactly who had tried to kill them. The horses were still breathing when Jake heard the second rider. He was on his feet before the thought finished, rifle raised, moving to the window. The storm had eased just enough to see movement. A single horse and rider pushing through snow that came up past the animal's chest. Whoever it was, they were either desperate or insane. Maybe both. Jake stepped outside, letting the cold hit him full force. "That's far enough," he called out. The rider kept coming. "I said that's far enough!" Jake raised the rifle to his shoulder. "Turn around or I'll—" "You'll what?" The voice cut through the wind, sharp and clear. A woman's voice. "Shoot someone trying to help?" Jake's fingers stayed on the trigger. "Don't need help. Those horses do." The rider was close enough now that Jake could see her face. Weathered, determined, maybe 40 years old. She wore a marshal's badge on her coat. "I've been tracking them for 3 days. You going to let me in or let me freeze?" Jake didn't move. 3 years alone made a man cautious. 3 years alone made a man paranoid. "Who are you?" "Emma Hartwell, Wildlife Protection Officer. Bureau of Land Management. She reached slowly into her coat and pulled out papers. Those Mustangs you're sheltering? They're federal property, and someone's been torturing them. Jake lowered the rifle an inch. Just an inch. I know about the torture. Saw the brand. Emma's expression hardened. Then you know who did it. Kane. Victor Kane. Emma dismounted, stumbling slightly as her boots hit the ground. She'd been riding too long. Mind if I come inside before I lose these toes? Jake should have said no. Should have sent her back down the mountain. Instead, he stepped aside and watched her lead her horse toward the lean-to. Watched her stop dead when she saw the stallion. "My God," she whispered. "He's alive," Jake said. "Barely." Emma knelt in the snow beside the black horse, her hands moving over the wounds with practiced efficiency. "These aren't from the roundup. These are fresh. Someone did this after they caught him." "Why?" "Because he wouldn't break." Emma's voice went cold. "Kane's been running illegal roundups for 2 years. Takes Mustangs off federal land. Breaks the ones he can sell. Kills the ones he can't. This one," she touched the stallion's neck gently. "This one fought back." Jake felt something twist in his chest. Recognition, maybe. Kinship. So Kane carved his name into him. Not just his name. A warning. Emma stood, brushing snow from her knees. For anyone who finds them. This is what happens when you resist Victor Kane. The wind picked up again, driving snow sideways. Jake looked at Emma properly for the first time. The exhaustion in her face, the determination in her eyes, the badge on her coat that probably didn't mean much against a man like Kane. "You came alone," he said. "Had to. Kane owns the sheriff, owns half the judges, owns anyone who might have helped." Emma met his gaze straight on. "I've been building a case against him for 18 months, following paper trails, documenting kills, collecting evidence. These 2 horses? They're witnesses, the only kind Kane can't buy or threaten." Jake thought about that, about what it meant to spend 18 months chasing justice against a man who could buy anything except the truth. "Why tell me this?" "Because you're Jake Thornton." Emma pulled out a worn notebook from her coat. "Former wilderness guide, best tracker in 3 territories. The man who brought 17 lost souls out of the Rockies without losing a single one." She paused. "Until Kane's son." Jake's jaw tightened. "You did your research." "I did, and I know what the town says about you. I also know what the evidence says." Emma flipped through her notebook. Michael Kane died from a fall at 2:47 p.m. on August 14, 1883. The coroner's report, the real one, not the one Kane paid for, shows blood alcohol content high enough to kill a horse. Your client logs show you warned him 6 times that day. Refused to take him up the ridge. He went anyway. "Doesn't change anything," Jake said quietly. "He's still dead." "Doesn't change the truth either. You tried to save him. Kane blamed you anyway." Emma closed the notebook. "Just like he's been blaming Mustangs for existing on land he wants. Just like he'll blame these horses for escaping his roundup. Truth doesn't matter to men like Kane. Only power does." Jake looked at the stallion, at the carved letters, at the violence written into flesh because one creature refused to surrender. "What do you want from me?" "Help." Emma said it simply. "I need someone who knows this territory, someone who isn't afraid of Kane, someone who might understand that fighting back isn't the same as being broken." "I'm not a hero," Jake said. "Didn't ask for a hero. Asked for a witness." Emma moved closer. "These horses came to you for a reason. Maybe they knew. Maybe they just got lucky. Either way, you're in this now. Question is whether you're going to hide up here like you've been doing, or whether you're going to help me prove what Kane really is." The words hit harder than Jake expected. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of convincing himself that staying alive was enough. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "I know you opened the gate." Emma's voice softened. "I know you could have turned them away. Let the mountain take them. Instead, you brought them inside, treated their wounds, stayed up all night keeping watch. That's not hiding. That's choosing." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to explain that helping 2 horses wasn't the same as taking on Victor Kane. But the stallion shifted beside him, breath steadying, and Jake remembered the look in those dark eyes. The recognition. "How long until Kane comes looking?" he asked. "He's already looking. Sent men out yesterday." Emma pulled off her gloves, flexing fingers that had gone white from cold. "They'll check the obvious places first. Box canyons, low valleys, anywhere Mustangs usually shelter. But when they don't find bodies, they'll expand the search." "How long?" 2 days, maybe 3 if the storm holds." Jake did the math. 2 days to decide. 2 days before Kane's men came up the mountain with guns and orders and the kind of authority that came from owning the law. "And if I help you, what's the plan?" Emma smiled, sharp and dangerous. "We document everything. Every wound, every brand, every illegal mark on these horses. I photograph them. You testify about finding them. We build a case so solid, even Kane's money can't bury it." He buried the truth about his son. His son was one death, easy to spin, easy to hide. This, Emma gestured at the horses. This is systematic. This is evidence of dozens of illegal kills over 2 years. Mustangs are protected by federal law. Kane's been breaking that law for profit. We prove it, and his whole empire comes down. Jake wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that truth mattered more than power. But he'd lived in the world long enough to know better. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said. "Maybe." Emma didn't flinch. "But I'm going to die knowing I tried. Can you say the same?" The question landed like a knife between ribs. Clean, precise, lethal. Jake looked at her, this woman who'd ridden through a blizzard alone, who'd spent 18 months building a case against a man who killed people for less, who stood in his cabin asking for help like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't even know you," he said. "You know me." Emma's voice was quiet now, honest. "You know exactly who I am. I'm the person who can't look away, who can't let it go, who sees something wrong and has to fix it even when fixing it might break them." She paused. "Just like you." "I'm not like you." "No?" Emma reached into her coat again and pulled out a photograph. Old, creased, faded. "This is my brother, David. He was a Mustang advocate, worked with the Bureau, tried to stop illegal roundups. Kane had him killed 3 years ago. Made it look like an accident." Jake took the photograph. A young man, maybe 25, standing beside a wild horse, smiling. "I'm sorry," Jake said, and meant it. "Don't be sorry. Help me." Emma's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. "Help me make sure David didn't die for nothing. Help me prove that standing up to men like Kane means something." Jake handed back the photograph, looked at the horses, looked at Emma, looked at the life he'd built up here. Small, safe, alone. "If I do this," he said slowly, "Kane will come after me. Again. Harder this time. Yes. He'll destroy whatever's left of my reputation. Probably. Might get me killed. Definitely possible." Emma met his eyes. "But you'll be alive when it happens. Really alive. Not just surviving, not just hiding. Living." Jake thought about that. About the difference between breathing and living. About 3 years of safety that felt like suffocation. "Okay," he said. Emma blinked. "Okay? I'll help you." Jake felt something unlock in his chest. Fear, maybe, or hope. "But we do it my way. My mountain, my rules. You follow my lead, or you leave." "Deal." Emma stuck out her hand. Jake shook it. Her grip was strong, certain. "First thing we need is supplies," he said. "Medical equipment, feed for the horses, cameras for documentation. Storm's going to break tomorrow. I'll go down, get what we need, be back before dark. Kane's men might be watching the town." "Let them watch. I'm just a hermit buying supplies." Jake grabbed his coat. "You stay here. Keep the horses alive. If anyone comes before I get back—" "I know how to use a rifle," Emma said. "Good." Jake paused at the door. "One more thing. Those photographs you've been collecting, the evidence, where is it?" "Hidden. Safe." "Not good enough. Kane finds it, he burns it. We need copies, multiple copies, sent to people he can't reach." Emma smiled. "Already done. Sent packets to 3 newspapers back east. If anything happens to me, they publish everything." Jake felt respect settle into place alongside the fear. This woman had been planning, really planning. "You're smarter than you look," he said. "I better be. Kane's got money, power, and reach. All I've got is truth and stubbornness." Emma looked at the horses. "And now I've got you." Jake wasn't sure that was much comfort, but he nodded anyway. He left at first light, when the storm had dulled to a steady fall. The town sat below like something half-remembered. Buildings he used to know, streets he used to walk, people who used to speak his name without hatred attached. The general store was the same. Same counter, same smell of leather and tobacco. Same clerk who'd sold him supplies for 3 years without ever asking questions. "Jake," the clerk, Tom, his name was Tom, nodded. "Storm supplies?" "That and medical equipment, bandages, antiseptic, sutures if you've got them." Tom's eyes narrowed slightly. "You hurt?" "Horses." "Didn't know you kept horses anymore." "I don't." Jake met his gaze. "Found some strays, figured I'd help them out." Tom gathered the supplies without comment, but Jake could see the calculation happening. News traveled fast in small towns, faster when it involved Kane. "That'll be $47, Tom said. Jake paid, turned to leave. Almost made it to the door before Tom spoke again.
"Jake, be careful."
Jake stopped. Careful of what?
"Kane's got men asking questions about horses, about anyone who might have seen them."
Tom's voice dropped.
"He's offering rewards, big ones, for information."
"Thanks for the warning."
"That's not all."
Tom glanced toward the window.
"He was in here yesterday, Kane himself. Said if anyone harbors stolen property, they'll be charged as accessories. Said the law's on his side."
"The law usually is, when you own it."
Tom flinched. "Just telling you what I heard."
Jake nodded and left. But the fear had teeth now. Kane wasn't just looking, he was hunting. And hunting meant he believed the horses were still alive. The ride back took longer. Jake kept checking behind him, watching for followers. The snow had stopped, but the cold hadn't eased. By the time he reached the cabin, his hands were numb and his lungs burned. Emma was waiting outside, rifle in hand. "Trouble?" she asked. "Not yet." Jake dismounted. "But it's coming. Kane's in town, asking questions, offering money." "Then we don't have 3 days. We have 1, maybe less." Emma helped him unload the supplies. We need to move fast. Document everything tonight. Get the evidence recorded before Kane's men reach the mountain. They worked until dark, and then they worked by lantern light. Emma photographed every wound, every brand, every mark of violence. Jake wrote down everything: times, dates, condition of the horses when he found them, the carved name. "This is good," Emma said, reviewing the photographs. "This is enough." "Is it?" Jake wasn't sure. "Enough to take down Kane?" "Enough to start." Emma looked at him. "Enough to make people question. And questions? Questions are what men like Kane fear most." The stallion had stood for the photographs without fighting. The mare, too. Like they understood. Like they knew this mattered. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now I ride back down. Get this evidence to the federal marshal in Cheyenne. It'll take 2 days if I push hard." Emma started packing her camera. "You stay here. Keep the horses safe. If Kane's men come—" "They won't find anything," Jake said. "I know how to hide." Emma paused. "That's what worries me. You're good at hiding." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means hiding is safe until it isn't. Means at some point you're going to have to choose. Stay invisible or stand visible." She touched his arm briefly. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If Kane comes, if he finds the horses, don't fight him alone. Get help. Use the church bells. I've got people in town watching for the signal. Promise me you won't try to be a hero." Jake thought about promises. About the promises he'd made before. About how many he'd kept. "I promise I'll keep the horses alive," he said. "Beyond that, can't promise anything." Emma looked like she wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded. "Fair enough." She left at dawn, riding hard into snow that had started falling again. Jake watched until she disappeared into the trees, then turned back to the cabin. The horses were watching him, both of them, alert, alive. "Just you and me now," Jake said. "Let's hope Emma's right. Let's hope truth matters." The stallion tossed its head. The mare stamped once. And somewhere down the mountain, Victor Kane was coming. They came 2 days later, just after dawn, and Jake heard them before he saw them. 6 horses, maybe 7, moving slow but deliberate up the mountain trail. Jake had been awake for 36 hours straight, living on coffee and the kind of alertness that came from knowing violence was coming and not knowing when. Now he knew. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. The air was still, cold enough to freeze breath in the lungs. The kind of morning that made every sound carry. "Stay inside," he called to the horses. Ridiculous, talking to them like they understood. But the stallion had been pacing for the last hour, sensing something. Animals always knew. The riders appeared through the trees, 6 men, all armed. And at the front, sitting straight in his saddle like he owned the mountain itself, was Victor Kane. Jake hadn't seen him in 3 years, hadn't wanted to. But Kane looked exactly the same. Silver hair, expensive coat, the kind of face that smiled when it wanted something and turned to stone when it didn't get it. "Jake Thornton," Kane's voice carried across the snow. Pleasant, friendly. The voice of a man making a social call. "Been a long time." "Not long enough," Jake said. Kane's smile didn't waver. "I've got a problem. Wondering if you might help me with it." "Don't think so." "You haven't heard the problem yet." Kane urged his horse forward a few steps. His men followed, spreading out slightly. Surrounding positions. Jake noticed. "Some horses went missing from my property. Wild ones. Mustangs. Worth very little. But they're mine nonetheless. Law says a man has a right to his property." "Law says a lot of things," Jake replied. "Doesn't make them true." "There it is." Kane's smile finally dropped. "That attitude.
That's self-righteousness. That's what got my son killed, you know. Your insistence on being right instead of being practical. Jake's finger moved closer to the trigger. Your son got himself killed being drunk and stupid. I tried to stop him. You tried? Kane's voice went sharp. He's dead, Thornton. Dead because you couldn't do your job. And now you're up here on my mountain, interfering with my business. Your mountain? Jake felt his own anger rise. This is federal land. Has been for 20 years. Land is whoever has the power to claim it. You should know that by now. Kane gestured to his men. Search the property. Find my horses. The men dismounted. Jake raised his rifle. Anyone takes another step, I drop them. Kane laughed. Actually laughed.
You gonna shoot 6 men, Jake? All by yourself? Up here where no one can hear? No witnesses, no law, nothing but your word against mine? He leaned forward in the saddle. And we both know how much your word is worth in this territory. Jake's heart hammered, but his hands stayed steady. Your horses aren't here. Then you won't mind if we look. I mind, Jake cocked the rifle. I mind men with guns trespassing on my property. I mind being threatened. I mind a lot of things, Kane. But mostly, I mind you thinking you can do whatever you want because you've got money and power. I can, Kane said simply. That's how the world works. Power takes what it wants. Always has. And right now, I want my property back. They're not yours. They've got my mark. You mean the name you carved into them? Jake felt the words land, saw Kane's expression flicker. Yeah, I saw. Everyone's going to see. Kane's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Emma Hartwell does. Federal wildlife officer. She was here, documented everything, photographed every wound, every illegal mark. She's got enough evidence to bury you, Kane. And if anything happens to me, it all goes public. For the first time, Kane looked uncertain. Just for a second. Then it was gone, replaced by something colder. Emma Hartwell, he said slowly. David Hartwell's sister. The one who's been asking questions about her brother's accident. He smiled, and it was the worst smile Jake had ever seen. That's who you're trusting? A woman with a grudge and a badge that means nothing out here? Means something to me. It shouldn't. Kane's voice dropped. David Hartwell died because he couldn't mind his own business. Stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Asked questions that didn't need asking. His sister's following the same path. And now you, he pointed at Jake, you're making the same mistake. Jake's blood went cold. You killed him. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Jake's voice shook with rage. You killed Emma's brother. And you've been killing Mustangs for years. For what? Money? Control, Kane corrected. Wild horses mean wild land. Wild land means federal restrictions. Federal restrictions mean I can't expand, can't grow, can't build the empire this territory needs. He straightened. So yes, I remove obstacles, whether they're horses or people who protect them. You're confessing, Jake said. Right now, you're confessing to murder. Am I? Kane looked around theatrically. I don't see any witnesses. No federal officers. No townspeople. Just 6 of my men and 1 broken hermit nobody believes. He dismounted slowly. This is how it ends, Jake. You give me the horses. You forget this conversation. You stay up here in your cabin and live out whatever's left of your miserable life. Or, he paused, you fight, and you die, just like David Hartwell, just like my son should have let you die. Jake's mind raced. Emma wouldn't reach Cheyenne for another day, at least. The evidence was safe, but it wouldn't help him now. He was alone, outnumbered, and Kane was right. No one would believe him. Unless... "You know what your son's last words were?" Jake asked. Kane froze. "What?" "His last words, before he fell. Before he died." Jake took a step forward. "He didn't call for you. Didn't ask for help. He laughed. Said, 'Father can't control the mountain.'" Jake paused. He was right. You can't control everything, Kane. Not the land, not the horses, not me. Kane's face went white with rage. "You're lying." "Am I?" Jake felt something shift. Power balancing. "He died knowing you'd blame someone else. Knowing you'd never admit he was weak. And he was weak, Kane. Just like you." "Enough!" Kane's hand moved to his belt. To a gun Jake hadn't seen before. "You want to die defending animals? Fine. But know this. After you're gone, I'm burning those horses alive, making sure everyone knows what happens to things that resist me." Jake raised his rifle. "Try it." Kane drew. Jake fired. The shot went wide, intentionally. It cracked across the valley like thunder, echoing off the peaks, rolling down the mountain toward town, toward the church, toward everyone who might be listening. Kane's men scattered, hands going to weapons. Kane himself dove behind his horse, cursing. "That's the signal," one of the men shouted. "He's signaling someone." "Kill him!" Kane screamed. "Kill him now!" Rifles came up. Jake dove behind the water trough, wood splintering as bullets tore through it. He fired back, not to hit, but to keep them down, to buy time, to hold on until... Until what? Until Emma's mysterious ally showed up? Until the town that hated him suddenly decided to care? Another bullet smashed into the cabin wall beside his head. Jake rolled, came up firing, dropped back down. His rifle only held 6 shots. He'd used 3. Kane's voice carried across the chaos. "Burn the cabin! Burn it all!" One of the men threw a torch. It arced through the air, trailing smoke, heading straight for the lean-to where the horses were. Jake didn't think. He ran. Caught the torch midair, burning his hand, threw it into the snow. Pain screamed up his arm, but he kept moving, kept firing, kept... The stallion burst from the lean-to. Midnight. That's what Jake had been calling him. The black horse charged into the open, wild-eyed, furious, heading straight for Kane's position. The mare followed, staying close, both of them moving like they'd been waiting for this moment. "No!" Jake shouted. "Get back!" But the horses didn't listen. They were wild. They were angry. And they were done running. Kane's horse reared, throwing him. His men's horses spooked, scattering. For a moment, everything was chaos. Horses, men, gunfire, snow thrown up in clouds. Jake used the confusion. He ran for the cabin, grabbed the oil lamp, smashed it against the porch steps. Flames spread fast. Not enough to destroy the cabin, but enough to create smoke. Thick, black smoke that rose straight up into the morning sky. A signal. A bigger one. "You idiot!" Kane was back on his feet, bleeding from where he'd hit the ground. "You're calling them here. You're bringing witnesses." "That's the idea," Jake said. And then he heard it. Bells. Church bells from town, ringing hard and fast. The alarm. The call to action. Kane heard it too. His face went from rage to calculation to something close to fear. "We need to leave," one of his men said. "Now, before..." "We're not leaving."
Kane pulled his gun again. "Not until those horses are dead and Thornton's with them." He fired. The bullet caught Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded, white-hot and complete. Jake went down hard, rifle flying from his hands. Kane advanced, gun raised.
Should have stayed hidden, hermit. Should have minded your own business. Jake tried to move. Couldn't. His left arm wasn't working right. Blood soaked through his coat, warm against cold skin. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with honor, not with justice, just with a bullet and snow and the man who destroyed his life standing over him. Midnight screamed, not a horse sound, something primal, something ancient. The stallion charged Kane directly, hooves striking, teeth bared. Kane fired, but the shot went wild. Midnight hit him like a battering ram, sending him sprawling. The mare circled, keeping Kane's men back, protecting Jake, protecting Midnight. Two wounded creatures who'd learned that sometimes survival meant fighting instead of running. Jake forced himself up. His vision swam. His shoulder felt like it was on fire. But he could move, could stumble toward his rifle, could... Horses. Lots of them, coming up the trail fast. Sheriff Morrison arrived first, gun drawn, then Tom from the general store, carrying a shotgun. Then others, townspeople, the ones who'd heard the bells, the ones who'd decided, finally, to see for themselves what was happening on the mountain. And at the front of them all, face set with determination, was Emma Hartwell. She hadn't ridden to Cheyenne. She'd ridden to town, to the people she'd been organizing quietly for months, to the witnesses she'd been preparing for exactly this moment. "Victor Kane," Emma's voice rang out, "you're under arrest for illegal poaching, animal cruelty, murder, and attempted murder." Kane struggled to his feet. Midnight backed off but stayed close, watching, waiting. "You can't prove anything," Kane said, but his voice shook now. The power was draining from it. "Can't I?" Emma pulled out a folder. "I've got photographs, testimony, witness statements from 3 different states. And now," she gestured at the scene, "I've got attempted murder in front of 20 witnesses." Kane looked at his men. They were already backing away, already calculating their own survival. "This isn't over," Kane said. "Yes," Emma replied quietly. "It is." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, handcuffs ready. 2 of his deputies moved to flank Kane. The man who'd owned the territory, who'd killed with impunity, who'd believed power made him untouchable, stood surrounded and beaten. Jake sank to his knees. The adrenaline was fading. The pain was coming back. Emma was beside him instantly, hands pressing against his shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. "You promised not to be a hero," she said. But she was crying. Actually crying. "Didn't be a hero," Jake managed. His voice sounded far away. "Just kept the horses alive." "You did more than that." Emma looked at Midnight, at Shadow, at the 2 wild creatures who'd chosen to fight instead of flee. "You gave them something to fight for." The stallion walked over slowly, bent his head, touched his muzzle to Jake's good shoulder. The gesture was unmistakable. "Thank you. Goodbye. Good luck." "You're free now," Jake whispered. "Both of you. Go. Run. Live." But the horses stayed, even as the townspeople gathered, even as the sheriff led Kane away in chains, even as the doctor arrived and started working on Jake's shoulder. They stayed until they were sure he'd live. Then, and only then, Midnight and Shadow turned toward the high country, toward freedom, toward the wild. They ran, not from anything, toward everything. And Jake watched them go, knowing he'd done something that mattered, something that would last longer than fear. longer than shame, longer than 3 years of hiding. He'd stood. He'd fought. He'd protected what couldn't protect itself. Emma's hand found his good one, squeezed tight. "Thank you," she said. Jake squeezed back. "Thank you for not giving up. On them. On me." The snow started falling again, soft now, gentle, like the mountain was finally forgiving him. Or maybe like he was finally forgiving himself. The bullet had cracked Jake's shoulder blade, but missed the artery. Doc Patterson said he was lucky. Jake didn't feel lucky. He felt like he'd been kicked by a horse and then dragged behind it for good measure. "You need to stay down," Doc said for the 5th time in 2 hours. "That wound opens up again. You'll bleed out before I can stitch you proper." Can't stay down. Jake tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. White-hot pain shot through his shoulder. "Kane's arraignment is today. I need to testify." "You can testify from a bed. Won't have the same impact." Jake gritted his teeth and forced himself upright. "People need to see me standing. Need to see I'm not afraid anymore." Emma appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee and something that might have been food. "He's right, Doc. Let him go." "He's going to tear those stitches." "Probably." Emma set the coffee on the table beside Jake's bed. "But he's going anyway. Might as well help him do it without bleeding all over the courthouse." Doc Patterson muttered something about stubborn fools and left to get more bandages. Emma sat down on the edge of the bed, close enough that Jake could smell pine and leather and something else. Something that reminded him he'd been alone too long. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I've got enough evidence to convict Kane 10 times over. Your testimony isn't necessary." "Yes, it is." Jake met her eyes. "Not for the case. For me. I need to stand in front of that town and tell them the truth. All of it. About Michael Kane. About what his father did. About what I should have said 3 years ago." "What stopped you then?" "Fear. Shame. Belief that my word against Kane's money meant nothing." Jake flexed his good hand. "I was wrong. Silence didn't protect me. It just gave Kane more power." Emma touched his arm gently. "You're braver than you think." "I'm terrified," Jake admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway. Isn't that what you said? Real courage is standing when running feels safer?" She smiled. "I did say that." "Well, I'm standing." The courthouse was packed. Jake hadn't seen this many people in one place since before he climbed the mountain. They filled the benches, lined the walls, spilled out into the hallway. Everyone wanted to see Victor Kane brought low. Jake walked in with Emma on one side and Sheriff Morrison on the other. His arm was in a sling. His shoulder throbbed with every step. But he kept his back straight and his eyes forward. Kane sat at the defense table, wearing expensive clothes and cheap handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like taking away his power had taken away his size. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Kane's were cold, empty. The eyes of a man who'd lost everything and wanted everyone else to lose too. Judge Harrison called the court to order. He was old, stern, and most importantly, not on Kane's payroll. The territorial government had sent him special after Emma's evidence reached Cheyenne. A judge who couldn't be bought or threatened. "Mr. Thornton," Judge Harrison said, "you're prepared to testify?" Jake stood. Pain lanced through his shoulder, but he didn't sit back down. "Yes, Your Honor." "Approach the witness stand." Jake walked forward. Every eye in the courtroom followed him. He could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their doubt. 3 years of believing him guilty wouldn't disappear in a day. He placed his good hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then he sat and waited for the questions.
The prosecutor started gentle. Name, occupation, how long he'd lived in the territory. Building foundation. Then, harder questions. Mr. Thornton, can you describe the events of August 14th, 1883? Jake took a breath. This was it. The moment he'd been avoiding for 3 years.
Michael Caine hired me to guide him up Thornton Peak. I refused initially. He was drunk, visibly intoxicated. I told him it wasn't safe.
But you eventually agreed?
No, he went anyway. Said his father owned the mountain, and he'd go with or without my help. Jake looked at Caine. I followed him, tried to keep him safe, but he was reckless, ignored every warning, took risks no sober man would take. And what happened? He fell, lost his footing on loose rock. I tried to reach him, but... Jake's voice cracked. I couldn't. He died instantly. The courtroom was silent. Jake forced himself to continue. After, Victor Caine blamed me, said I'd been negligent, said I'd led his son into danger. But the truth was, his son led himself there. The coroner's report showed blood alcohol high enough to kill a man. Michael Caine was dying before he ever started climbing. The fall just finished what the whiskey started. Caine's lawyer jumped up. Objection!
This is hearsay and slander against a deceased...
Overruled. Judge Harrison's voice cut like steel. The coroner's report is evidence. Continue, Mr. Thornton. Jake nodded. Caine didn't want the truth. He wanted someone to blame. Someone who couldn't fight back. So he destroyed my reputation, drove me out of town, made sure everyone knew I was the man who killed Michael Caine. When actually, the prosecutor said, you tried to save him. I did. I tried everything. But you can't save someone from themselves. Jake looked at the jury, at the townspeople, at the faces that had once known him. Caine spent 3 years making me believe that failure was my fault, making me hide, making me think I deserved to be forgotten. And now? Now I know different. Caine's a murderer. He killed Emma Hartwell's brother. He's killed hundreds of protected Mustangs. He tried to kill me. And he would have kept killing if those 2 horses hadn't staggered into my corral and refused to die quietly. The prosecutor smiled. Tell us about the horses. So Jake did. He told them about finding Midnight and Shadow, about the carved brand, about Emma's investigation, about Caine's confession on the mountain. Every word, every detail. When he finished, the courtroom erupted, people shouting, crying, demanding justice. Judge Harrison had to bang his gavel 5 times to restore order. Caine's lawyer tried to cross-examine, tried to paint Jake as unreliable, bitter, seeking revenge. But every attack fell flat. Emma's photographs corroborated everything. The witnesses from the mountain confirmed it. Even some of Caine's own men, offered immunity, testified against him. By the time the prosecution rested, Caine's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was dust. The defense called no witnesses. What could they say? The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Harrison didn't even recess before rendering his verdict. Victor Caine, you are hereby found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, illegal poaching of protected wildlife, animal cruelty, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. His voice rang through the silent courtroom. You are sentenced to 20 years hard labor at the territorial prison. Your assets are seized and will be liquidated to pay restitution to your victims' families. Caine's face went white. You can't. I have rights. You forfeited your rights when you carved your name into living flesh and thought power made it acceptable. Judge Harrison leaned forward. You wanted to be remembered, Mr. Caine? You will be, as the man who thought he owned everything and died owning nothing. 2 marshals led Caine away. He fought them, screaming threats and curses. But his voice got smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. The courtroom emptied slowly. People approached Jake, some to apologize, some to thank him, some just to touch his good shoulder, like he was something real they needed to confirm existed. Tom from the general store was one of the first. "Jake, I'm sorry. I knew the truth about Michael, knew he was drunk, but Kane paid me to stay quiet, paid a lot of people." "I know," Jake said. And he did. Fear made people do terrible things. Money made it easier. Others followed. The baker who'd refused him service, the banker who'd closed his accounts, the minister who'd suggested he leave town for everyone's good. All of them carrying shame. All of them asking forgiveness. Jake gave it, not because they deserved it, because carrying anger up that mountain for 3 more years would kill him faster than any bullet. By the time the courthouse cleared, it was just Jake, Emma, and Sheriff Morrison. "There's something else," Morrison said. He looked uncomfortable. "The town council met this morning. They want to offer you a position." Jake frowned. "What kind of position?" "Guardian of the Bighorn Mustang Range. It's new. Federal and territorial funding. You'd protect the wild herds, monitor the land, make sure what Kane did never happens again." Morrison paused. "It comes with a salary. And a house in town. Real one, not a cabin." Jake looked at Emma. She was smiling. "They're trying to make amends," she said softly. "Trying to give you back what they took." "I don't want what they took. That man's dead." Jake felt the truth of it settle. "But I'll take the job. Not for them. For the horses." Morrison nodded. "There's more. Emma's been appointed the territory's first Chief Wildlife Protection Officer. You'd be working together." Emma's eyes widened. "They approved it? I thought the council said—" "Council changed their minds when 3 newspapers ran your story on the front page. Turns out territorial governors don't like being known for harboring animal murderers." Morrison almost smiled. "Congratulations, Chief Hartwell." Emma looked stunned. Then she started laughing. Actually laughing, the sound bright and free and infectious. Jake found himself laughing too, though it hurt his shoulder. "We did it," Emma said. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jake corrected. "I just opened a gate." "You did more than that." Emma's expression turned serious. "You gave me hope. When I thought David's death meant nothing, when I thought Kane would win because he always won, you showed me that one person standing up could change everything." "2 people," Jake said. "We did this together." "2 people," Emma agreed, "and 2 horses who refused to die quietly." They left the courthouse together. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow gold and red. The town looked different somehow. Or maybe Jake was different. Maybe seeing it without shame changed how the buildings stood, how the streets felt. "What now?" Emma asked. "Now I heal. Accept that job. Start protecting Mustangs instead of hiding from people." Jake paused. "What about you?" "Same. Build a department. Hire good people. Make sure every wild horse in the territory has someone watching their back." Emma looked up at the mountain. "And visit 2 black horses who taught me that freedom's worth fighting for." "They're not black. One's bay." "Shadow's dark bay, practically black." "Still bay." Emma laughed again. "Are we really arguing about horse colors right now?" "Seems important," Jake said. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. When was the last time he'd done that? They walked through town together. People nodded respectfully. Some waved. A few children ran up asking if Jake was really the man who fought Victor Kane. He said no. He was the man who fed 2 hungry horses. The truth was simpler than the legend. At the edge of town, Emma stopped. "Jake,
I need to ask you something. What? Back on the mountain, when Cain had you, when he shot you. She looked down. I thought you were going to die. And I realized I couldn't imagine a world where you did. Jake's heart did something complicated in his chest. Emma, let me finish. She met his eyes. I know we barely know each other. I know this is fast. But nothing about this has been slow. From the moment I rode up that mountain, you've been... She searched for words. You've been the person I didn't know I was looking for. I'm broken, Jake said quietly. I'm still learning how to be around people again. I don't know if I'm good at anything except survival. Then we'll learn together. Emma took his good hand. If you want to. Jake thought about the cabin, about 3 years of isolation, about choosing safety over connection. Then he thought about midnight and Shadow running free because someone had opened the gate. Sometimes the bravest thing was letting people in. Yeah, he said. I want to. Emma kissed him, gentle at first, then deeper. Jake's shoulders screamed in protest, but he didn't care. For the first time in 3 years, he felt alive, really alive, not just surviving, living. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was crying again. Happy tears, she said quickly. I swear. Good. Jake wiped them away with his thumb. Because I've had enough sad ones to last a lifetime. They stood there as the sun finished setting, 2 broken people who'd found each other in the aftermath of violence, and decided that maybe broken things could still build something whole. And somewhere on the mountain, 2 wild horses ran free, carrying with them the proof that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was opening the gate anyway. Spring came slowly to the high country, the way it always did. Snow receded in patches, revealing brown earth that looked wounded and raw. But underneath, green was waiting. It always was. Jake stood at the corral watching midnight and Shadow. They'd spent the winter in town, healing in a barn Emma had converted into a temporary sanctuary. The wounds had closed. The scars remained. Some things didn't disappear just because the bleeding stopped. They're ready, Emma said, coming up beside him. She'd been saying it for a week. Jake knew she was right. He just wasn't ready to let them go. Yeah, he said. I know. The ceremony's set for Saturday. Whole town's coming. Governor's sending a representative. It's going to be... Emma paused, searching for the word. Big, Jake finished. I know. I just wish it could be quiet. Just us and the horses. It could have been, but these horses saved more than themselves. They saved you. They exposed Cain. They changed laws. Emma touched his arm. People need to see them run free. Need to know that standing up to power actually works. Jake looked at the stallion. Midnight had filled out over the winter, muscles rebuilding, coat shining like oil on water. But his eyes still carried wariness, still watched doors and corners like violence might come from anywhere. What if they don't run? Jake asked quietly. What if they're too damaged, too scared? Then we'll know we gave them the choice. That's all freedom is, Jake. The chance to choose. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that almost felt warm. Jake had forgotten what warm felt like. He'd forgotten a lot of things during those 3 years on the mountain. He was remembering them now, one day at a time. The meadow above town filled with people, hundreds of them. Some Jake recognized, some he didn't. They'd come from neighboring territories, from as far as Denver and Cheyenne. Emma's story had spread. The hermit who saved the horses, the woman who brought down an empire, the Mustangs who refused to die. Judge Harrison was there, standing with the territorial governor. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies formed a loose perimeter, keeping the crowd back. Tom from the general store had brought his whole family. Even Doc Patterson had made the trip, complaining about his knees the whole way. And at the center of it all stood Jake and Emma, holding the lead ropes attached to Midnight and Shadow. The governor spoke first. Something about justice and protection and the territory's commitment to wildlife. Jake barely heard it. He was watching the horses, seeing how they tensed at the crowd noise, how Shadow pressed close to Midnight for reassurance. Emma spoke next. She talked about her brother David, about the years of investigation, about how truth required patience and courage and witnesses willing to speak, even when silence was safer. Her voice broke twice. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Then it was Jake's turn. He hadn't prepared anything, didn't know what to say to hundreds of people who'd spent 3 years believing he was guilty. But when he opened his mouth, the words came anyway.
"I don't know much about speeches," he started. "I know about horses, about mountains, about what happens when you hide from the world because the world hurt you." The crowd leaned in. Even the children were quiet. "These 2 horses came to me dying. Someone had hurt them deliberately, cruelly, because they wouldn't break. And I had a choice: turn them away or help them. Safe or right." Jake looked at Midnight. "I chose right, and it changed everything." He paused, gathering courage. "For 3 years I believed I deserved to be alone, believed my failure with Michael Caine made me worthless. But these horses taught me something. They taught me that being broken doesn't mean being finished, that scars are proof you survived, not proof you're weak." Emma's hand found his, squeezed tight. "Today we're setting them free, not because they're healed. Healing takes longer than 1 winter. But because freedom isn't something you earn, it's something you choose. And they've chosen to be wild again." Jake turned to the horses. Midnight watched him with those dark, knowing eyes. Shadow nickered softly. "Thank you," Jake said quietly, just to them. "Thank you for trusting me when you had no reason to. Thank you for fighting when giving up would have been easier. Thank you for showing me that opening the gate is always the right choice." He unclipped the lead rope from Midnight's halter. Emma did the same with Shadow. The crowd held its breath. The horses didn't move. Midnight stood there, free but uncertain. Shadow waited beside him. They'd been captive so long, maybe they'd forgotten what freedom looked like. Jake's heart sank. This was it. The moment everyone would see that some damage couldn't be undone. That Caine had won after all, even from prison. Then Midnight took a step forward, just one, toward the open meadow, toward the high country beyond. Shadow followed. Another step, another, their pace increasing. Walking became trotting. Trotting became cantering, and then they ran. Midnight led, black coat gleaming in the sunlight, mane flying. Shadow stayed at his flank, matching his stride. They ran across the meadow, through the new grass, toward the tree line where the wild herds waited. The crowd erupted, cheering, crying, celebrating. But Jake couldn't hear them. He was watching the horses disappear into the trees, carrying with them proof that broken things could still run free. Emma was crying. Jake realized he was too. "They did it," she whispered. "They actually did it." "Yeah," Jake said. "They did." But as the crowd began to disperse, as people congratulated each other and headed back to town, Midnight reappeared at the tree line, just for a moment. The stallions stood there, silhouetted against the pines, looking back at Jake. Their eyes met across the distance. Jake raised his hand. A salute. A goodbye. A thank you. Midnight tossed his head once, then turned and vanished into the wilderness. "He came back to say goodbye," Emma said. No. Jake felt the truth of it settle. He came back to say it was okay, to let go, to live. The winter that followed was the warmest Jake could remember, and it had nothing to do with temperature. He and Emma married in October, a small ceremony with Tom as witness and Doc Patterson complaining about the cold. They moved into the house the town had provided, though Jake still kept the cabin on the mountain. Some things you didn't abandon just because you'd moved on. His work as guardian of the Mustang range kept him busy. He rode the high country every week, checking on the herds, documenting numbers, making sure Kane's legacy of violence didn't repeat itself. Emma rode with him when she could, though her duties as Chief Wildlife Protection Officer kept her traveling more than either of them liked. But they always came home to each other. That was the difference. Jake had a home now. Not a hiding place, a home. The town changed too. Slowly. The kind of change that happened when people chose differently. The bakery started leaving day-old bread on Jake's porch with apology notes. The banker personally restored his accounts with interest. The minister preached a sermon about forgiveness that everyone knew was directed at himself. Jake accepted it all, not because he had to, because carrying grudges was just another form of prison, and he'd been locked up long enough. Emma's book came out in February. The Mustangs Who Saved a Mountain, it was called. She'd written it in stolen hours between investigations, pouring everything into its pages. David's death, Kane's crimes, Jake's redemption, the horse's courage. Publishers in Boston and New York fought over it. It became required reading in schools across 3 territories. But the best part, Emma said, was the law it inspired. The Federal Mustang Protection Act of 1887. Real protection, with real penalties for violation. David's death had finally meant something. They were reading reviews one evening when Emma set down the newspaper and looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What?" he asked. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Jake's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "You're what?" "Pregnant. With child. Expecting." Emma smiled nervously. "Due in July." Jake set down the cup carefully. His hands were shaking. "How long have you known?" 2 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Emma touched her stomach. Are you happy?" Happy didn't begin to cover it. Terrified, elated, overwhelmed, grateful, all of those and more. A year ago, Jake had been alone on a mountain, convinced his life was over. Now he had a wife, a purpose, a future, and soon a child. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "What if I'm a terrible father? What if I can't protect them? What if—" Emma kissed him, stopping the spiral of fear. "You saved 2 dying horses in a blizzard. I think you can handle a baby. Horses don't need college funds. Neither do babies, for at least 18 years. Emma laughed. "We'll figure it out, together, like we figure out everything." Jake pulled her close, careful of her stomach, even though nothing showed yet. "Yeah, together." Spring came again. Their daughter was born in late July, during a thunderstorm that shook the house. They named her Hope. It seemed appropriate. Jake held her for the first time, with his hands still shaking from fear and wonder and the weight of responsibility. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on him not to fail. "She's beautiful," Emma whispered from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "She's terrifying," Jake corrected. But he was smiling too. Hope grew fast. By her first birthday, she was walking, stumbling after Jake through the meadow grass, laughing when he caught her before she fell. By 2, she was riding in front of him on his saddle, tiny hands gripping the horn, asking endless questions about horses and mountains and why the sky was blue.
Jake answered every question, taught her everything he knew: how to track, how to read weather, how to approach wild animals with respect. But most importantly, he taught her to be brave when being afraid felt safer. On Hope's 3rd birthday, Jake took her and Emma up to the high meadow where they'd released Midnight and Shadow. The wild herd was there, grazing peacefully. Maybe 30 horses now, their numbers recovering under Jake's protection. And at the front of the herd, grayer now but still magnificent, stood Midnight. Hope gasped. "Papa, is that him? The horse from your story?" "That's him," Jake confirmed. The stallion raised his head, scenting the wind. His eyes found Jake across the meadow. Recognition flared. Memory. Midnight walked toward them slowly. Shadow followed, older now, a foal at her side. The rest of the herd watched but didn't scatter. They'd learned that Jake meant safety. "Can I touch him?" Hope whispered. "Let him decide," Jake said. Midnight approached until he stood just feet away. He looked at Jake, at Emma, at the small human between them. Then he lowered his head, allowing Hope's tiny hand to touch his muzzle. Hope's face lit up with pure joy. "He remembers you!" "Yeah," Jake said quietly. "He remembers." They stood there for a long moment, two species that had saved each other, acknowledging the debt. Then Midnight lifted his head, returned to his herd, and led them toward the high country. Hope waved goodbye. "Will we see him again?" "Maybe," Jake said, "if we're lucky." But luck had nothing to do with it. Jake visited that meadow every month. Midnight was there more often than not, leading his herd, protecting his family, living the life he'd almost lost, just like Jake. Years passed. Hope grew. Other children followed. 2 sons who had their mother's determination and their father's quiet strength. Jake taught them all, not just about horses and mountains, but about courage, about standing up when sitting down felt safer, about opening gates even when closing them was easier. The town thrived. Emma's department expanded to cover 4 territories. Jake trained a whole generation of wilderness guides and Mustang protectors. Kane's name faded from memory, replaced by stories of the hermit who chose right over safe. On Jake's 60th birthday, the territory dedicated the Thornton Hartwell Mustang Sanctuary, 10,000 acres of protected land where wild horses could run free forever. The ceremony was smaller than the one 20 years earlier, but more meaningful. Hope spoke, now a wildlife officer herself. His sons unveiled the plaque, and afterward, Jake and Emma rode up to the high meadow one more time. Midnight was still there. Old now, gray around the muzzle, moving slower, but alive, still leading, still free. The stallion walked over without hesitation, touched his nose to Jake's chest. A greeting, a thank you, a goodbye that had been 20 years in the making. "I'm proud of you," Jake whispered. "You survived. You thrived. You built something beautiful." Midnight snorted softly, breath warm against Jake's hand. Emma leaned against Jake's shoulder. "He could say the same about you." Jake thought about that, about the broken hermit he'd been, about the man he'd become, about the family he'd built, and the legacy he'd leave. "We saved each other," he said finally. "That's all it was. 2 broken things that refused to stay broken." They rode back down as the sun set, painting the mountains gold and red. Behind them, Midnight returned to his herd. Ahead of them, their children waited with grandchildren Jake still couldn't quite believe existed. And somewhere in between, in the space between past and future, between broken and healed, between alone and together, Jake Thornton finally understood what he'd learned that winter night when 2 dying horses collapsed at his gate. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It wasn't being unbreakable or fearless or perfect. Courage was opening the gate anyway, knowing you might get hurt, knowing you might fail, but choosing to try because trying mattered more than safety ever could. Jake had opened the gate, and everything that came after, the love, the family, the purpose, the life worth living, had walked through it. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything.